I want you to picture something with me, not the version of my life I was proud of, the one I showed at church, the one I bragged about quietly when people asked how my son was doing. I want you to picture me standing in the middle of a church hall in Boston on a Sunday in June, wearing my cobalt blue dress, facing my son across a room full of people who knew both of us, and saying the words I had rehearsed in the shower every morning for 3 months. I said, "I'm not your mother today. I'm the woman whose name you stole." The room went so quiet, you could hear the folding chairs. Marcus looked at me the way he always looked at me when I surprised him. Not with guilt, not with shame, but with the particular contempt of someone who believed I would never stop being manageable. That look, that exact look is the reason I stopped shaking. His certainty that I would sit back down was the very thing that kept my knees straight. But I need to take you back. Because you cannot understand what that moment cost me without knowing what it cost me to get there. It is spring. The windows are finally open. In my shotgun house in Boston's industrial district, where the old brick factories have been converted into apartments, and the whole city block smells like renovation and ambition and old concrete trying to remember what it used to be. In my house, the windows open in a line, room by room by room, all the way from the front door to the back porch, and when the air moves through, it moves like a thought you've been afraid to finish. I am 41 years old. I am still wearing my cobalt blue church dress with the matching hat because I went to the 8 a.m. Mass and came straight home and could not find one reason to change. The rosary beads hang from the bedroom mirror exactly where I placed them the morning my husband left, 7 years ago, and I have never moved them because moving them would mean making a decision about what I believed, and some mornings that felt like too much. The scent of fresh cornbread cooling on the counter moves through the front room. I don't know exactly why I baked it. My hands bake cornbread the way my lungs breathe. Out of habit, out of memory, out of the belief my mother installed in me that you keep something warm on the counter even when there is no one to feed. My mother called it faith in the form of flour and butter. I called it what it was, hope that someone might still show up. My plastic pill organizer with the days of the week sits beside my unfinished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table. I do crossword puzzles every morning, slowly, deliberately, filling in letters the same patient way I used to believe I understood my own life. 5 across, a 7-letter word for betrayal. I stare at it and leave it blank. Sunday's compartment is still full. I forgot to take them again. The phone has not rung in 11 days. Marcus texted me on a Tuesday at 9:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I took a screenshot immediately. The way your body knows, before your brain catches up, that something is going to matter. 23 words. Mom, I moved into Sandra's dad's place. It's better for us. You're on your own now. Not a call. A text. I'm going to let that settle for a second. Because I know some of you reading this know exactly what it feels like to receive information like that, in a format designed to prevent response. He didn't call because he didn't want to hear my voice. He texted because a text is a door you can close before the other person can open it. He had been living in my home for 3 years by then, in the front 2 rooms of my shotgun house while I slept in the back, using my back porch on weekends like it was already his by inheritance, watching my neighborhood gentrify around us while the house itself still belonged to me. Or I thought it did. I thought a lot of things. I thought I knew the shape of my own life. I thought the letters from lenders that kept arriving at my address were billing errors. I thought my son was protecting me. I thought the people I loved would not do to me what I had always been afraid strangers might. Outside, the spring light falls across the brick buildings on my street the way it always does in Boston in May, sideways and tentative, like it doesn't quite believe winter is finished. The trees along the block are stubbornly green. Somebody down the street has a porch radio on. The air moves through my house, room by room by room, all the way to the back porch where Marcus's outdoor chair still sits. I pick up my crossword puzzle. I put it down. The phone sits on the table beside the pill organizer, and I look at it the way you look at something that used to mean more than it does now. Something is wrong. I know it the way you know the specific wrongness of a house when someone has moved through it and touched things and left. The wrongness isn't in the air, it's in the silence where the air used to be. I just don't know yet how wrong. If someone in your life has ever made you feel like your instincts were the problem, share this story with them. Because what I'm about to tell you took me too long to understand, and I don't want that for anyone else. I get up. I open another window. I let spring come in whether it's been invited or not. And then I go to the bedroom and look at the rosary beads and I start to pray. Which is what I always did when I was about to discover something that would require me to be stronger than I thought I was. Let me tell you about the woman I was before I became the woman in that church hall. She baked on Sunday mornings without being asked. She made 2 batches, one for herself, one to leave in the church kitchen for whoever needed something warm on the way out. She wore her cobalt blue dress to the 8 a.m. Mass and sat in the 4th pew on the left because that was her mother's pew before it was hers. And she believed in the inheritance of good seats the same way she believed in the inheritance of good character. She was 41 years old, and she had a crossword puzzle habit and a pill organizer and a shotgun house in a part of Boston that was slowly forgetting it had ever been working class. She had a son she loved with the specific ferocity of a woman who had already lost one significant man and refused to lose another. That woman, that version of me, had an extraordinary capacity for explanation. Marcus was stressed. The economy was hard. He and Sandra were newlyweds in a city where 2 salaries barely covered a 1-bedroom, and of course they needed to stay with me for a while. Of course the transition was difficult. Of course he was short-tempered sometimes. Of course he forgot to ask. He was overwhelmed. He was trying. Sandra's family, the father with his mansion in the suburbs, the air of old money and new condescension, looked down on Marcus, and that made him ashamed. And shame makes people behave badly, and behaving badly is not the same as being bad. I told myself this. I believed it the way you believe something you need to be true. I should be honest about something else, because the real story is never just about the villain. I had been alone for 7 years by the time Marcus moved in. My husband left when Marcus was in his mid-20s, and I was still trying to figure out which version of myself was the real one. The loneliness had become so ordinary, I stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of a refrigerator. It's only when it stops that you realize how constant it was. And then Marcus was back, with his wife and his complications and his noise, and the house felt inhabited again. The cornbread had somewhere to go. I gave him that, and I didn't count what it was costing me. I am talking about relationships, capital R, because this is what I lost first and what took longest to understand. My sister Carol stopped calling. When I finally asked her why, years later, she told me that Marcus had told her I had said cruel things about her children, specific things, detailed things she could not unhear. I had never said any of it. Not a syllable. But I had been so isolated by then that I had no context to disprove it. I hadn't spoken to Carol enough for her to know the accusations didn't sound like me. My friend Denise from church, the woman I had done Friday dinners with for 8 years, the woman who knew my cornbread recipe better than I knew it myself, stopped inviting me. She told me eventually, months later, with tears in her eyes. Marcus had told her I was going through something and needed space. He had said it gently, convincingly, with the face of a concerned son managing a difficult mother. Denise had believed him because she had no reason not to. He was clearing the room. I understand that now. But in the middle of it, I simply thought the people I loved had decided I was too much. I abandoned my crossword puzzles for a while. I stopped going to Denise's Friday dinners and told myself it was fine. I preferred the evenings alone. I put the rosary beads on the mirror and then stared at them without praying, because prayer requires a level of honesty I wasn't ready for yet. The scent of cornbread, and the quiet of the house, and the rosary beads in the bedroom mirror became a kind of still life that I was living inside of, barely moving, while life moved around me. Meanwhile, the letters came. First from a lender I didn't recognize, then from a bank I did. I showed Marcus the first letter and he looked at it and said, "Billing error, Mom. I'll handle it." He took the letter from my hand and I watched him put it in his jacket pocket and I thought, good, he's handling it. That was in 2021. I know some of you want to shake me right now. I understand that. You're looking at this from the outside, where things are obvious. From inside it, with the loneliness and the excuse-making and the love that I had invested so much of myself into protecting. From inside it, you grasp at the explanation that causes the least destruction. The second letter came in November. He said the same thing. Billing error. They have your address on file from something I did 2 years ago. I'll fix it. I picked up my crossword puzzle. I filled in a 7-letter word for something I could not name yet. And outside, the spring that had felt so full of possibility began to fade into summer. And the brick buildings on my street cast longer shadows, and the Lexus LS in champagne gold that Sandra's father drove past my block twice a week gleamed in the afternoon light like a promise someone had made to the wrong person. Something was about to be undeniable. I wasn't ready, but it was coming anyway. It was a Sunday in March. I had worn the cobalt blue dress to Mass and come straight home the way I always did. And Marcus and Sandra were at my kitchen table eating cornbread when I got back, which was their habit, arriving while I was gone, making themselves comfortable in the kitchen, treating my home with the easy ownership of people who have been told, without words, that the space belongs to them. I was used to this. I am not proud of how used to it I was. Sandra left early. Something about her father wanting them for dinner. Marcus stayed to shower. He did that sometimes. Stayed to use my hot water without asking. A small daily theft I had categorized as a family habit rather than what it was. His phone was on my kitchen table. I was washing dishes. The plastic pill organizer with the days of the week sat by the sink where I had moved it, so I'd remember Sunday's compartment. I had forgotten again. At 11:18 p.m., Marcus's phone buzzed. I was not going to look. I want to be clear about that. I was raised to respect privacy. I believe in it. But the screen lit up on the table, and I happened to be standing close enough, and the preview was long enough that the words were simply there before I could look away. Sandra's name. And then? Did your mom find the second contract yet? Delete it from the printer history. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably 10 seconds. Then I read it again. Then I read it 3 more times, because I needed to be absolutely certain that my eyes were reporting accurately and my brain was not constructing a nightmare from ordinary words. The second contract. The printer history. Your mom find. My legs carried me to the kitchen chair. My pill organizer was still there. Sunday's compartment full. I sat down and I stared at the phone and I listened to the shower running, and I felt something I can only describe as the floor dropping out from underneath a floor I had not known was suspended. The key object sat in my hand, and I turned it over once, then set it down on the table beside the crossword puzzle I had not touched in 3 weeks. It had once represented the routine that kept me functional. Now, holding it, I felt the weight of all the Sundays I had sat at this table trusting the shape of my life. I got up. I went to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I looked at the rosary beads hanging from the mirror, and for the first time in a very long time, I actually prayed. I prayed for clarity. I prayed for the courage to count correctly. And then I went to my filing cabinet, the one in the back room, the one I had not opened in over a year, and I pulled out every letter that had arrived at my address from any financial institution since 2021. There were 9 of them. I did the math. And I want you to understand what that means. To sit at a kitchen table with letters spread in front of you and add up the numbers and watch the total become a number you cannot make smaller, no matter how many times you add it again. Sacrifice. Not just time and meals and space and loneliness, but $47,000 from a 2021 personal loan signed in my name, and another $19,000 from a second loan, 2022, same signature that was not mine. Together, $66,000 in debt attached to my credit, my history, my future, by a hand that was not mine, on contracts I had never seen, arranged by the two people who had been eating cornbread at my kitchen table that very morning. This is what the collapse feels like. It is not dramatic. It is mathematical. It is sitting at a kitchen table in your cobalt blue church dress at midnight with 9 letters and a pill organizer and a crossword puzzle you will never finish, and arriving at a number that tells you who you have been to the people you loved most. I had given him a home. 3 years of subsidized housing in a city where rent was vicious. Utilities, alone. Groceries I had never counted. My friendship network, dismantled. My sister gone. My Fridays with Denise gone. And my name, my literal legal name, forged twice onto contracts for $66,000. I went to the sink and I stood there for a while with the water running cold over my hands, and I thought about my mother, who had taught me to keep something warm on the counter, even when no one was coming. I thought about what she would say if she were here. I thought she would tell me to sit back down at that kitchen table and open the crossword puzzle and fill in every single blank. And then she would tell me to call a lawyer in the morning. My hands shook for 3 days after that. Not constantly, in waves, the way grief comes, the way shock comes, arriving and receding and arriving again. I could not finish a crossword puzzle. I stopped cooking. The counter was bare. The pill organizer sat untouched. But I had the letters. I had the dates. I had a screenshot of a text message that was not meant for me. And I had a name, the second contract, that meant there was more to find. I'm going to tell you something about shame. Because it is the thing nobody talks about when they talk about being exploited by family. The shame is not about being foolish. I have sat with that long enough to know it was never really about foolishness. The shame is about love, specifically about the love you gave that turned out not to be received the way you gave it. The shame is standing in a bank with a fraud complaint form in your hand and knowing that the person who committed the fraud called you mom. I called the bank on a Monday morning in March. I stood in my kitchen in regular clothes, not the church dress, just jeans and a sweater. And I dialed the number on the back of the letter, and I said, carefully and clearly, that I believed someone had used my identity to obtain loans without my consent. The woman on the phone was professional and kind, and walked me through the dispute process, and at the end of the call said there was a credit counseling session the bank referred customers to and would I like the information. I said yes. I wrote down the address. I went that Thursday. Patricia was already in the room when I arrived. She was sitting in a folding chair near the window with a paper coffee cup, and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to conserve energy for what actually matters. She was older than me by maybe 12 years, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the kind of face that has felt everything and decided not to be ashamed of the evidence. We were the only 2 people in the early session that day. The counselor walked us through the dispute process, the fraud affidavit, the documentation chain. Patricia and I didn't speak during the session, but after. When the counselor stepped out to make copies, Patricia looked at me and said simply, "Family." It was not a question. I said, "My son." She said, "My daughter." And that was the beginning of the only conversation that actually put me back together. Patricia spent 2 hours with me after that session, not pitying me. I want to be precise about this because pity would have broken me, and what she gave me instead was information. She had been through a forensic document review when her daughter forged her signature on a property transfer. She had learned through a credit attorney that forged signatures on loan documents constituted fraud in Massachusetts and were prosecutable. She had found a housing advocate who helped her navigate the aftermath. She knew what the bank's timeline looked like, what the lender's options were, and what the phrase court-ordered repayment actually meant in practical terms. She handed me names on a folded piece of paper she had written out while the counselor was talking. A lawyer, a document forensics specialist, a housing advocate she personally vouched for. She said, "You don't need to be angry to do this. You just need to be organized." I looked at her across the table, and I felt something I had not felt in such a long time that I almost didn't recognize it. The sensation of not being alone in a room. The sensation of being in the presence of someone who was not managing me, not clearing the room around me, not deciding on my behalf what I was capable of handling. She was simply there, equal, with information and the specific generosity of someone who has survived and wants that survival to mean something beyond her own story. I think about Patricia at specific moments, in the shower, at the kitchen table, in quiet hours on the back porch, when the brick buildings across the street catch the afternoon light. I think about the version of myself that walked into that credit counseling session with her shame held close, like a coat she was afraid to take off, and the version that walked out with a folded piece of paper in her hand and the beginning of a plan. I called the document forensics specialist that Friday. She confirmed within 2 weeks that both signatures on the loan documents were inconsistent with my actual signature in multiple measurable ways. Pressure, angle, letter formation, spacing. Not close. Not a reasonable approximation. Deliberately different in ways that suggested someone who had not practiced carefully enough or had simply assumed no one would ever check. That assumption, the assumption that I would never check, was the most expensive mistake Marcus ever made. I started thinking in terms of strategy rather than grief. I started keeping a folder. I made copies of everything and gave one copy to Patricia and kept one at the house and gave one to the lawyer Patricia had recommended. I started taking Sunday's compartment of the pill organizer on time every morning because keeping myself functional was now a tactical decision. The anger was there. I am not going to pretend it wasn't. But Patricia had been right. I didn't need the anger. I needed the folder. And I needed to start talking to people. Here is something nobody tells you about the period between knowing the truth and being ready to act on it. It requires a performance. Every day for 6 weeks, I woke up and made cornbread and did my crossword puzzle and took Sunday's compartment of my pill organizer and behaved like a woman who had not recently discovered that she was carrying $66, zero of fraudulent debt, and had a forensics report confirming it. Marcus came by twice during those 6 weeks, once to pick up a mail package that had been delivered to my address, once with Sandra, who smiled at me with the particular warmth of someone who has already decided you're not a threat. I smiled back. I made cornbread. I want you to understand something about what it costs to perform normalcy when your interior life is a war room. Every time I saw Sandra smile at me across my kitchen table, I felt the distance between my face and my actual feelings like a physical space I was holding open with considerable effort. But I held it. Because Patricia had said something in that counseling session that had stayed with me like a note I kept in my pocket and touched throughout the day. The most powerful thing you can do is not react until you're ready. I was getting ready. The lawyer, whose name was Ms. Chen, had filed the fraud affidavit with the bank and had initiated contact with the lender. The document forensics report was part of the official complaint. Ms. Chen said the process would take time, but that the evidence was strong and that my credit, already beginning to show the damage from 2 large delinquent loans, would be protected through the dispute. She said the word prosecutable the same way Patricia had said it. Matter of fact, not dramatic, as if prosecution were a bus you could simply choose to board. Patricia called me every Thursday. We talked for an hour. She never told me what to do. She had learned, the hard way, that telling someone what to do when they haven't arrived there themselves is just another kind of management. She asked me questions. How was I sleeping? Had I eaten? Had I talked to Carol yet? Had I talked to Denise? She asked about the crossword puzzles. She asked about the rosary beads. She asked me once if I had thought about where I wanted to live after this was done. I had not thought about it. I had been so focused on the injury that I had forgotten to think about the after. When she asked, I sat on my back porch and looked at the brick buildings and the converted factory windows catching the early May light, and I thought, for the first time in a very long time, about what I actually wanted. Not what I was responsible for. Not what I owed, or what I had lost, or what I was fighting to recover. What I wanted. I wanted to sign my own name on a lease, my name, written by my hand, for my own apartment in a building no one else could lay claim to. That image, my handwriting on a page, my signature on a document that was entirely and only mine, arrived in my chest like something returning after a long absence, like a window opening in a room that had been sealed for years. That was the week I called the housing advocate Patricia had recommended. I explained my situation. She explained my options. And on a Thursday afternoon in May, I signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in a building 6 blocks from my shotgun house, close enough that I knew the neighborhood, far enough that no one who knew Marcus would know my new address immediately. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, the way I filled in a crossword puzzle, letter by letter, like each one meant something. It was the most significant financial document I had signed in my adult life that I actually signed myself. Afterward, I sat in my car for a few minutes and thought about the Lexus LS in champagne gold that Sandra's father drove past my block twice a week. I had always looked at that car with a complicated feeling. Partly the recognition of wealth I had not been able to build, partly the awareness that the wealth it represented had in some way contributed to my son's decision that I was a resource rather than a person. I thought about it now differently. I thought, someday I am going to test drive one of those, not to prove anything, just to know what it feels like to want something for no reason, except that I want it. Patricia was the first person I called. She said, "Good. Now tell the right people what happened." I had been building that list. Carol, Denise, 3 deacons at the church who had known Marcus since he was 12 years old, the property manager of my building who had Marcus listed as an emergency contact on my file. Key people. Real people. People who needed to know not to be his alibi anymore. I started with Carol. She cried. I did not. I simply told her the truth in the order it happened and let her receive it without helping her feel better about it. Because helping people feel better about the truth had been a significant part of how I had ended up in this position to begin with. Then I called Denise. Then I went to church. Something was building. I could feel it the way you feel the change of season. Not in one day, not in one moment, but in the accumulation of small shifts that become undeniable. Spring was becoming summer in Boston. The air on my street smelled like warmed brick and the particular sweetness of trees that have survived another winter. And Marcus, who had cleared every room I'd ever been in, had no idea the room he was walking into. There is a kind of clarity that comes after you have made every necessary decision, and all that remains is the moment itself. I had given Ms. Chen everything she needed. The fraud complaint was active. The forensics report was filed. The lender had been contacted. Carol and Denise knew the truth. The deacons knew. The property manager had removed Marcus as an emergency contact and flagged his name in the building system. Patricia knew every detail. The housing advocate had my lease secured. The folder, the methodical, labeled, chronological folder that held 3 months of documented truth, existed in 3 copies. The trap, if you want to call it that, was not something I constructed. It was something I simply stopped preventing. I had spent 3 years preventing things, preventing conflict, preventing discomfort, preventing the kind of honest accounting that would have required me to stop making excuses for the people who were exploiting them. I had been a prevention machine running on cornbread and crossword puzzles, and the belief that love looked like infinite patience. What I was doing now was simply stepping out of the way. Ms. Chen had advised me not to confront Marcus directly before the legal process was complete. I had honored that advice. I had not called him. I had not texted. I had not responded to the 2 texts he sent in early June, asking if he could store some additional items at the house, the same house he had texted to tell me I was on my own in. I had not responded because I had nothing to say to him that was appropriate to a text message. What I had to say required a room. I had been attending the 10 a.m. Sunday service consistently throughout the spring. The fellowship hour afterward was something I had retreated from during the years Marcus was managing my social circle. It had felt exposing to be there, visible, when I was never sure what story was circulating about me. Now I went every week. I stood in the hall with my coffee cup, and I talked to Denise and Carol and the people I had allowed to disappear from my life. And the re-entry was not as difficult as I had feared. People who love you are generally ready to receive you back when you stop disappearing. I had mentioned to no one that Marcus was expected at the service in June. I had mentioned to no one that he had texted Sandra's father asking for permission to attend in order to collect some items left in the hall storage room by Sandra's women's group. I knew this because Sandra's father, a man of considerable business acumen, who had built his fortune the old-fashioned way and did not take lightly to discovering that the man who had married his daughter had forged a $66,000 fraud on a woman who attended his church, had called me directly in early June. That call surprised me more than almost anything in this story. He introduced himself properly, asked if I had a few minutes, and then spent 20 minutes asking questions in the careful tone of a man recalibrating a significant assessment. He was not warm. He was not apologetic. But he was honest, and honesty from unexpected directions has a particular power. He said, at the end of the call, "I would like to understand the full scope of what happened. My attorney will be in touch." I gave his attorney everything in the folder. Sandra's father drove a Lexus LS in champagne gold. I had seen it parked outside church twice in the weeks that followed his call. I thought about that car differently now, not as a symbol of what had been taken from me, but as evidence of something I had always believed and nearly allowed to be beaten out of me. That wealth and integrity are not the same thing, and that the people who actually built something worth having can recognize, without needing to be told, when someone has tried to steal from a foundation rather than lay their own. He had recognized it in Marcus, and he had made his own decisions accordingly. I did not know, going into that Sunday morning in June, exactly what would happen. I knew Marcus was coming to the storage room. I knew he would see me at fellowship hour. I knew that Denise was there and Carol was there and 3 deacons who had known him since childhood were there. I knew the forensics report was filed. I knew the fraud complaint was active. I knew Ms. Chen had told me the lender had already begun pursuing Marcus directly once my dispute was verified. I knew that I had stopped preventing things. The cornbread on my counter that Sunday morning was the first batch I had baked since March. I made it the same way I always had. The way my mother taught me. The way you make something without measuring because your hands remember the proportions better than your brain does. I ate a piece standing at the counter in my cobalt blue dress with the matching hat, and I tasted it the same way I tasted everything that morning. With the attention of a woman who has remembered that she is still alive, and that living has particular, specific pleasures that no one can take from you as long as you keep noticing them. Then I picked up my plastic pill organizer with the days of the week, took Sunday's compartment on time, set the organizer back on the table beside my unfinished crossword puzzle, and drove to church. The fellowship hall after the 10 a.m. service had the specific warmth of a room that has been holding the same conversations for 30 years. Coffee urns and folding chairs, and the smell of somebody's pound cake, and the low, steady sound of people who know each other's names. I had stood in that room hundreds of times. I had made cornbread for that room. I had, for a period, disappeared from it because my son had told the people in it a version of me that wasn't true. I was back. I was standing near the window with Denise and Carol on either side of me, not as a strategy, just as the shape of a morning that had come together naturally, when Marcus walked in. He came in with Sandra, who was carrying a tote bag, already scanning the room for the door to the storage area. He was wearing the particular expression of a man who believed the hardest part of the day was parking. He hadn't seen me yet. Then he did. His face went through several stages in approximately 2 seconds. Recognition. Surprise. The beginning of the managed smile he always wore when he was about to redirect a situation. And then something else. A micro-calculation. A brief flicker of assessment, trying to determine how public this was and whether it was still manageable. He said, "Mom, hey." As though we had simply not crossed paths in a while. I want you to picture this. 23 people in that room. Denise on my left, Carol on my right. 3 deacons at the coffee urn. Families in folding chairs. Children running between the chairs. The pound cake, the coffee. The morning light coming through the fellowship hall windows at the angle it always comes through in June in Boston. Amber and specific and entirely indifferent to what human beings decide to do beneath it. I put down my coffee cup. I said, "You forged my name on $66 in contracts. I have the forensics report, and everyone in this room deserves to know who you are." The room did not gasp. It went still. There is a difference. A gasp is a reaction. A stillness is a recognition. These were people who had prayed beside my mother and watched Marcus grow up and had, in many cases, already received pieces of this story from Carol or Denise, or simply from the particular intelligence of a community that has been observing its own members long enough to notice when something is wrong. The stillness was not shock. It was the sound of confirmation. Marcus said, "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself." And I said, "I'm not your mother today. I'm the woman whose name you stole. I want you to hold that line." Because I had not rehearsed it for the performance of it. I had rehearsed it because I needed to know, in my own body, that I could say it without trembling. That I could stand in a room full of people who knew me and say the most painful truth of my recent life without my voice breaking or my knees giving or my habitual mercy rushing in to soften the edges. My voice did not break. My knees were straight. He tried again. "This isn't the place. You chose the place when you thought this room would protect you from me. It doesn't." Sandra put her hand on his arm. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was the gesture of someone recalculating. "I have a forensics report confirming the signatures on both loan documents are not mine," I said. "I have a fraud complaint filed with the bank and the lender. I have a legal representation handling both. And I have receipts, 3 years of them, for every utility, every grocery, every letter I paid the consequences of while you were deciding I didn't matter." One of the deacons set down his coffee cup, not loudly, just set it down. "You built your comfort on my credit," I said. "You built your marriage on my address. You cleared every person who loved me out of arm's reach, so that when you needed a signature, there would be no one left to tell me not to believe you. That's not what a son does. That's what a predator does." The word landed in the room the way honest words land when they are spoken in spaces where the truth has been waited for. Marcus looked at me with the face of someone who has lost the handle on the situation and knows it. The particular desperation of a person whose strategy has always depended on the compliance of the person they were exploiting. I was not complying. I was not softening. I was not going to sit back down and let him redirect this into a conversation about my feelings. "I forgive you," I said. And I meant it, not as a gift to him, but as a door I was closing. I forgive you because carrying hatred is heavy, and I have been carrying heavy things for too long. But forgiveness doesn't mean permission. It doesn't mean silence. And it doesn't mean I owe you the version of myself who looked the other way. He left. He walked out of that fellowship hall with Sandra beside him and his tote bag, and his managed expression, and the room watched him go and then turned back to the coffee and the pound cake and the morning. And Denise squeezed my arm, and Carol put her forehead against my shoulder, and I stood there, and I breathed. The most powerful thing I have ever done was not build something, or sacrifice something, or carry something. It was stand still in a room and tell the truth and let it be loud enough that no one who heard it could unhear it. Some people have a price. Some people have a performance. Some people have a story about you that makes your silence useful to them. And some mornings, you put on your cobalt blue dress and you go to church and you collect the debt that's been owed to you in the only currency that actually matters. The truth, said out loud, in a room full of witnesses. Justice, when it arrives, is quieter than you expect. There is no music. There is no ceremony. There is a phone call from Ms. Chen on a Tuesday afternoon in July, telling me that the bank had verified the fraud complaint and removed both loans from my credit record. There is a second call the following week saying the lender had pursued Marcus directly and that he was under a court-ordered repayment plan for the full $66,000. There is a text, one word, from Sandra's father that read simply, "Done." Marcus had 30 days to vacate the mansion. I want to be precise about what I felt when I received that news, because I think people expect triumph, and the truth is more complicated and more interesting than triumph. What I felt was spacious. Like a room that had been full of furniture for years had finally been cleared, and I was standing in the middle of it, noticing how much light came through the windows when nothing was blocking it. I did not feel victorious. I felt spacious. The apartment I had signed my lease on in May was ready for me in August. I had been living in my shotgun house through the summer, the house that had held my mother's memory and my loneliness, and 3 years of a son who had treated it like a resource. And I had packed slowly, deliberately, the way you pack when you're not running from something, but walking toward it. Each room in the shotgun house was a room of my life that I was choosing to leave behind, which is different from abandoning it. The plastic pill organizer with the days of the week, I held in my hand for a long time before I decided what to do with it. I could tell you it was the last thing I packed, and that would be true. But the reason it was the last thing I packed was not nostalgia. It was because I needed to understand what it meant to me now, after everything, before I put it in a box. When I first saw that text message on Marcus's phone, Sandra asking whether I had found the second contract yet, the pill organizer had been sitting on the table beside me, Sunday's compartment still full, symbol of the woman who had been too distracted by giving to remember to take care of herself. In the months that followed, taking Sunday's compartment on time had become a daily act of tactical self-preservation. Now, at the other side of everything, the pill organizer was simply a small plastic container that helped me remember. I put it in my coat pocket. I carried it to the new apartment myself. Patricia helped me move. I want to be clear that helped me move means she arrived at 8 a.m. with a truck, her nephew, and 2 cups of coffee, and she directed the whole operation with the same efficient intelligence she had brought to 2 hours in a credit counseling session. We worked all morning. We had cornbread for lunch. I had baked it in the shotgun house kitchen one final time, in the pan my mother had given me, and carried it over wrapped in a dish towel. Patricia said, eating her second piece, "Your mother would be proud." I said, "My mother would have seen through him in about 30 seconds. Patricia laughed. It was a real laugh, full-bodied, with no performance in it. The kind of laugh you get from someone who has earned the right to find things genuinely funny again. The new apartment has windows that face east, which means I get the morning light the way I always wanted it, early and direct, across the kitchen table where I do my crossword puzzles. The counter is mine. The cornbread cools on my counter for no reason except habit and the belief my mother installed in me, and some mornings that is reason enough. The rosary beads from the bedroom mirror I moved to the new apartment, and I did take a moment to decide, this time consciously, that they would hang on the bathroom mirror, not the bedroom mirror, because I want to see them in the morning when I am most myself, face bare, before the day has made any demands. The day I signed the lease, I had called it anywhere I can finally call my own. Signing my name on a lease, my actual name, written by my actual hand, on a document that meant what it said, had felt like reclaiming something I had not known was missing until I got it back. Sitting in the apartment now, with Patricia across from me and the morning light on the table and the cornbread between us, I thought, this is not anywhere. This is specific. This is mine. Ms. Chen sent me a final summary of the legal resolution. Marcus's credit had been flagged. His accounts had been frozen during the investigation. The repayment order was in place. He had not contacted me. I did not expect him to. Men who treat their mothers as resources do not generally apologize when the resource closes the account. I thought about the Lexus LS in champagne gold. Not about Sandra's father's car, about the one I was going to test drive someday purely for myself. I put it on a list I started keeping that August. Things I was going to do for no reason except that I wanted to. Test drive a champagne gold Lexus, take a Friday night cooking class, call Carol every Sunday, sleep until 9 on Saturdays with no guilt and no agenda. The list kept growing. That felt right. Patricia and I sat on my new back porch that afternoon, smaller than the Shotgun House porch, but entirely mine. And I thought about what survival actually looks like from the inside. It doesn't look like triumph. It looks like a woman with a pill organizer in her coat pocket, and a forensics report in a folder, and cornbread on the counter, and a crossword puzzle on the kitchen table, and a friend across from her who asked no more of her than she asked of herself, just to keep going, just to sign her name with her own hand, just to let the air move through. It is late summer now. The trees on my street are still green, but the light has shifted, less direct, more golden, the way Boston light changes in August, when the season begins to remember that fall is coming. The windows in my apartment are open, and the air comes through differently than it did in the Shotgun House. Not room by room by room in that straight, uninterrupted shotgun line, but in the softer way of a space with corners and turns, a space built for someone to inhabit privately. I do my crossword puzzle every morning at the kitchen table. I take Sunday's compartment of my pill organizer every day, on time, the way you take care of yourself when you have decided that your continuation matters. I bake cornbread on Sunday mornings before church. I sit in the fourth pew from the left, my mother's pew, my pew, and I do not perform a version of my life for anyone. I want to talk about what happened, not just to me, but around me. Because one of the things that took longest to understand was not Marcus's betrayal, but the system of silence that had allowed it to continue for as long as it did. When I told Denise the truth, her first response was not anger at Marcus. Her first response was guilt. She said, "I should have called you. I let him tell me you needed space, and I accepted that. And I told her what I need to tell you now. That is what enablers do, and they are not villains for it. They are people who were managed the same way I was managed, with plausible explanations, and the particular force of a son playing the role of a devoted intermediary. Marcus had flying monkeys, a term I learned from Patricia, who had learned it from her own ordeal. People in our social environment who, without knowing what they were doing, carried his narrative and enforced my isolation. They were not complicit. They were used. That distinction matters, both for how I understood what happened to me and for how I was able to receive people back into my life after it. The word flying monkeys comes from the study of manipulative family dynamics. And understanding it changed how I saw the whole 3-year architecture of what Marcus had constructed. He had not simply stolen my signature. He had engineered an environment in which I was surrounded only by his version of reality, which made the theft easier and the discovery less likely. He understood, intuitively or deliberately, that an isolated target has no witnesses. An isolated woman with no one checking in, no one who knows the texture of her daily life well enough to notice when something is wrong, is a woman whose name you can forge on a $66 document, and whose phone can ring 11 days without anyone noticing. I am telling you this because I think about who might be listening to this right now. And I think about what it means that the patterns Marcus used on me are not individual or exceptional. They are documented, recurring, and far more common than anyone wants to admit. Some American states now prevent heirs convicted of abuse from receiving inheritance from the victim, which means the law itself is beginning to recognize that what happens inside families, in kitchens and shotgun houses and fellowship halls, is not private tragedy, but prosecutable pattern. That legal development tells me something important. The systems are beginning to catch up to what the people living inside these situations have always known. That financial exploitation of a parent by an adult child is not a failure of love. It is a crime with a name. And a 2012 study found that 1 in 4 nursing home residents had suffered physical abuse, a number that tells us something about what happens when we allow the vulnerable to be managed entirely by those who have already decided their comfort comes last. I was not in a nursing home, but I was in a house where someone had decided my name was a resource, and my silence was an asset, and my loneliness was a condition to be maintained rather than addressed. The difference between that house and worse situations is not as large as we would like it to be. Do not wait until you are sitting by a phone that never rings to count what you have given. Count it now. Before the isolation is complete, before the letters arrive, while you still have the network, the witnesses, the people who can look at you and say, "That doesn't sound like you," before your name is forged on something you haven't seen. And if you are already past that point, if you are already in the middle of it, already sitting at the kitchen table with the letters spread out and the numbers adding up to something you didn't authorize, then I want you to know that what I am telling you is also true. It is not over. The math can be done in your favor, too. The truth can still be told in a room full of witnesses. Your name can still be yours. The first thing you do is call someone, not to ask for permission, not to confess, to inform. Find your Patricia, the person who has been through it and survived it and is willing to spend 2 hours after a credit counseling session handing you a folded piece of paper with names on it. She exists. I found her in a bank referral program on a Thursday in March when I had nothing but a forensics report and a folder and 3 days of shaking hands. My rebirth has been financial. Slowly, deliberately, the way you rebuild something that was undermined brick by brick. My credit is restored. The loans are removed. The repayment order is in place. I have a lease with my name on it. I have a list of things I intend to do for no reason except that I want to. And somewhere near the top of that list is a champagne gold Lexus that I intend to test drive on a Saturday morning, alone, with the windows down and nowhere specific to be. And I have something that cannot be quantified in dollars or income or net worth or any of the other measures I used to think determined the shape of a woman's fortune. I have the specific, unassailable knowledge that I stood in a room full of people and told the truth, and it cost me exactly what it should have cost, which was nothing. My name is mine. My voice is mine. My name written on a lease, signed by my own hand, in a building that belongs to me. That is not a recovery from what happened. That is the arrival of what was always supposed to be mine. I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. Or tell me, what would you have done differently? Would you have confronted him sooner? Stayed quiet longer? Or are you, right now, sitting with your own folder of letters and a shaking hand and a truth you haven't said out loud yet? If this story reached you where you live, not in the geography of it, but in the feeling of it, then like it, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. Because the stories I tell are for the people who are still sitting by the phone waiting for it to ring. You don't have to wait anymore. The first move is yours to make.